Hi there, this is Robin Andrews from CompUcademy, and this is a video about nested for loops. Now, to get us started, I'm going to show you a pattern that I've made using nested for loops. And here it is. You can see we've got 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. We've got these rows of increasing length. Now, this would be a classic case where you would use nested for loops to create this kind of pattern. So I'm not going to show you the code for that straight away. I will soon, but I want to build up to it a little bit. So let's close that off. Okay. Let's start off with a basic example. For I in range, we'll just do 2. And then for j in range 2. Okay, so this might be new to you, using a for loop within a for loop. And this is how you do it. I'm using I and j, a little bit sloppy. Generally, you're encouraged to use at least 3 letters for your for variables generally in Python. But I'm not focusing on style at the minute. I'm just focusing on the concept. So I and j are fine for this. Very often you'll find that I becomes row and j becomes column, but don't worry too much about that for now. So what am I going to do with my I and j? So within this inner loop, I'm going to print I, comma j. Now you might want to spend a moment thinking what this is going to print before I actually run it. Let's run it. So 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. Now why is that? Well, first of all, range in Python actually has a default lower bound. So it's actually going from 0, and it's not actually going to 2, it's going to 1 less than the upper bound. So it's going to 1. So that explains why we're not seeing any 2s. So let's bring it up again. So 0, 0. First of all, the I variable, that's the outer loop, is 0. And then in the inner loop, j goes from 0 to 1. And then the outer loop variable, that's I, is set to 1, and we repeat the process. J goes from 0 to 1. Now the symmetry here might make things a little bit confusing, so let's just change it a bit. Let's make this 3. And again, you might want to pause the video and have a think about what's going to be printed. Here it is. So this time, for each count of the outer loop, starting at 0, we're actually getting 3 inner loop values, okay? And again, 1 is the outer loop here, and then we're getting 3 for the inner loop, for j, okay? Now, it might take a little bit of time to understand this, depending on your level of experience. So what I encourage you to do is to play around with some different numbers and make sure you understand how this works. Always try and predict what you're going to see before actually running it. Let's instead have that going from 3, maybe to 10. And let's have this one going from 2 up to, say, 5. Now remember, the upper bound isn't included. Okay, so 2 to 5 for j will give you 2, 3, and 4. It won't give you 5. So what's this going to display? It's going to display this. Okay, so the outer loop starts at 3. For each outer loop count, or each outer loop value, you get 3 inner loop values, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, etc. So that's the basics. Let's look at another example. So here I'm actually using the outer loop counter, which is I in this case, as a variable inside my inner loop. Now, this is actually not that uncommon. If you've ever done things like bubble sort or insertion sort, you're going to be doing something similar to this. You may find that you use while loops, or you use a combination of for and while loops, but the basic idea is the same. You have access to the outer loop counter within your inner loop. Okay. Now let's look at what this prints. So we get 1, 0, 2, 0, 2, 1. Now that might surprise you why that's happening. Let's just look at what's going on. First of all, the value for I is going to be 0. So for that particular loop, the range is also going to be 0, which means it's not going to execute. Okay, so that's why you don't get any output for when I is 0. But then we go back to the outer loop and I increments to 1. So in that case, I is 1, but we're only going to 1. And remember, this number here is the upper bound. So it's only going to print 0, and then it's going to exit. And then when I becomes 2, okay, so this value is now 2. You can see here we got 2 and 0, and then we got 2 and 1, because remember, the upper bound was 2, which means it doesn't actually reach 2. So that's the output you get for those values. Now this might be a little bit confusing. So again, I recommend changing the numbers, playing with the numbers, trying to trace it in your mind, tracing it on paper, finding a way to just really fully understand what's going on here before we move on. Okay, so now we come to the triangle. I showed you the pattern earlier. Let's quickly remind you. So now that I've given you the basic idea, you might feel that you can tackle this on your own. So by all means, go ahead and try. And then come back, or if you don't feel ready, I'll just go through it now. So first of all, we're going to have a simple value 10, which is what we're counting up to. And then we're going to have 4i in range. And we're going to go from 1, because we don't want 0 in our list. And we're actually going to go to n plus 1 because we want to include, right? Remember, we want to include n's value, so we have to go 1 past it. Very, very common in programming that you're going to get what's called an off by 1 error because you don't notice something like this. But that's why I've put plus 1. Yeah? And then I'm going to do 4j in range. And the range for my inner variable is also going to be from 1. But this time it's going to go to I plus 1. Oh, let's have a space there. I plus 1. For the same reason, yeah, it wants to go 1 more than I to make sure that it actually includes the value of I itself. Okay. And then we're just going to use a couple of little tricks with print. We're going to print j, that's the inner loop counter. And then we're going to use this argument to the print statement, which is end. And that tells it not to go onto a new line. It means after every character, don't print a new line character, which forces it onto a new line, but just print nothing, and it will stay on the same line. Okay, I might unpack that in a moment, but for now, just take my word for it. And then if we do want to force the printing to go onto the next line for the next row, then we just do print bracket bracket. Okay, so let's see if that works. And it does. Let's just have a look at some of the details of that print statement. So for I in range, let's do 10. All right. Then if we do print, and we're going to print I, but then we're going to have end, we can actually have anything in here. We could have a space, right? So space would give you this output. Let's say we don't want space, but we want computer science is cool, right? In between. Yeah, you see it just pads it out with whatever's inside these quotes gets inserted between each item in our list. Okay, so that's how end works. And of course, it's doing this for every value. So it's doing it for 0 and then adding that to the end, and then it's doing it for 1 and adding that onto the end, etc. So there's that. And then also print on its own is just a way of forcing things onto a new line. So if I copy this again, you'll see that that middle one has forced the second row to go onto a new line. Yeah. If we didn't have that, you see there's no new line. So that's just explaining the mechanics of the output in this particular example here where we built the triangle. So you might be wondering why that works, and now you know. But really the magic is in the looping. So you've got an outer loop, you've got an inner loop that's actually referring to the value of that outer loop, and then you've got some print statements to display things in the way you want. So that's nested for loops in Python. Just to recap, probably the most important part of this lesson was this exercise here with a triangle pattern. If you can understand how and why this works, then you'll be well on your way to understanding this important concept. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.